Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what I believe is an era of political commissars, of ideological commissars. That is, officers or people that are there to enforce globalist ideology, particularly race and gender and transgender and all that sort of stuff. Now, I recently, or not long ago, met a diversity and inclusion officer, and they've got today in the government and corporate world in Australia and elsewhere, as I understand it, certainly in Britain and many parts of the United States, these officers have sweeping powers, almost arbitrary powers to shut down a meeting because there's not enough black lesbians in it, or to say that any department is too white or too straight or too male, and to insist on changes, including white people getting fired for being white and these sorts of things. So, but their powers are quite arbitrary. So they can say that someone's been offended or might be offended or could be offended. Therefore, so they can go to the way to hire a single sort of black lesbian single mother, then everyone else in the organisation has to tiptoe around this person that's been forced and wedged into the place anyway. So these are the power these people have to, and fully supported by CEO and top management. They seem to like the idea of everyone's guessing on, well, what really is the policy? What if I say hello? Is that going to offend somebody? So the policies are very vague. And typically, not all the time, but typically these enforcers are very ideological, very angry. Your gender studies, angry gender studies major. Not all of them, though. In some of the government departments where there's already a very the majority of people are non-white and the majority are non-male and so on, then they maybe take a slightly softer tone. But I've been in a meeting about computer infrastructure, and it was all very, very technical and so on. But there was a woman in there. I wasn't sure what she did and what she was there for. I just assumed she was part of the technical team, and this is like a government department. And she decided that the presentation wasn't gender neutral enough, but was quite vague about in what way it failed to be gender neutral. But she had the power to stop the presentation, shut the meeting down, and I was quite perplexed by this, that somebody would have that arbitrary power. Now, if they want to come along after the meeting's over and say, "Oh, look, the problem I had with it was this, that, and so, so and so," and come out with some clear and concise facts and so on, then that's one thing. But to be that disruptive, they can just arbitrarily not have to prove anything, not have to provide any evidence or proof, can just arbitrarily, with their wave of a fucking hand, shut the meeting down. So that was something I sort of had a problem with. Again, if there's an issue, bring it up, and has it contravened policy, or has it contravened the law, or something like that? But that's not how these people want to run it. They want something vague, non-codified and arbitrary. For example, how the social media platforms define hate speech. They actually don't define it, or the definition is so vague that it could be anything. And this allows them the capacity to act arbitrarily at any time they choose, to target anyone they want. And this is really how this is. So, and in this meeting, there was pretty much all straight white males at this particular meeting that I was in. And if you really look at the way this woman behaved, who was a white but a lesbian, then her problem wasn't that there was any contravention of policy or this or that. There was just too many straight white males in the room. Now, certainly then, given the qualifications required for this sort of level of technology, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone other than straight white males that was doing it, but even that's a problem. So they can say, well, when you're going down that ideological path, you can say, well, the problem is, and you give some vague sort of approximate fact. Too many sort of straight white males in the room. Now that doesn't have to contravene a policy. You just have to say that it's bad, and this is the power these political commissars have. And if you say, well, nearly all the people who are qualified in this field are straight white males, well, then society at large has a problem. So you still got to shut the meeting down and so that there's always somewhere they can go ideologically to justify their disruptive and destructive behaviour. Now, just in the Soviet Union, as an example, this is communist Russia between 1917 and sort of 1990. They had every aspect of life was seen as being ideologically communist. The colonel in the army or someone that was committed to communist objectives and communist ideology. You had to be ideologically pure as a communist. This was very, very important to Soviet Russian communists believed. So every factory, every enterprise, everything had to have, that they could have a manager, like a factory manager, or the general leads the army, but they had to be partnered with who had equal or if not greater authority. They had to be partnered with a commissar, and the commissar had the final word. The general couldn't say, well, we're going to send the tanks here. The commissar had to approve it, otherwise it couldn't happen. Same in a factory. The factory manager couldn't say, well, I think I'll get Billy Bob to make more of the widgets down in the back there. No, the commissar has to approve it. And so everything was seen as an ideological issue. Nothing was business, nothing was government, nothing was military. Everything was ideological first, and only then, when the ideological issues had been addressed, only then could they look at the practical issues. Now, of course, it was immensely destructive to the Soviet. Even things like the building manager in a big block of apartments had to have a political commissar there. So everything was seen through this prism, this lens of the communist ideology. And we see this, that the globalists are enforcing this on us in the West, and we have pretty much the same thing. These diversity inclusion officers, now whether it's a separate diversity inclusion department or a diversity inclusion sort of subset within the HR department, it doesn't really matter. It can be one or the other, but it equals the same thing. So that's what is all across the West now, and I think it's getting worse. Hiring is ideological, promotions are ideological. The race, gender quotas, everything is fucking ideological now along race and gender and sexual subset lines. And it's done deliberately to crush, humiliate and undermine Western society. These people at the apex, they don't give a flying fuck about anything like this. They don't care how many black people here or transgender there. It's a globalist play to undermine the fabric of Western society, and it's gathering and going apace. I mean, if anything's been successful, I think in many ways that has. There are now very, very few organisations that are untouched by it. Now, sure, the senior management run around, crowing about how many black lesbians they've hired and all this sort of thing. They don't actually care about that, but it also shows. And particularly the big end of Wall Street. Now, Wall Street, they care about their big salaries and all that sort of stuff. They don't give a shit about the plebs, but it is useful to shut everyone up so they can keep the masses diverted, the serfs diverted, while they still pull their big buck salaries for doing, sweet fuck all. But now there's also another aspect to this, and I've mentioned this a few times before about. Actually, I'll do another video on this one. I can do another video on this, but I just wanted to do that political commissar thing. And if you look at like just looking at the top, the highest paid 100 jobs in Australia, certainly at the moment, the highest paid 100 jobs, 72% of them are government and quango jobs or NGOs. Now, 28% are about half of that 28%, or a little bit more than half of that 28%, companies, or they're private businesses, but they rely 100% on government contracts. And so they've lost all independence. They're just there to get cosy government contracts, and then they have to bring in vast numbers of black and brown peasants from wherever, the third world. And that's their mission. We'll give you this monopoly. We'll give you this easy money, but you've got to do this for us. And so the globalists were able to, control the government that supposedly represents us, which in turn, effectively corrupts and bribes swathes of the private sector to then do the work that the government's a little bit reluctant to do on their own. Well, we didn't bring in all those brown and black peasants. It was that private business that they said they were short on skills. They had to do it. Skills. They were all engineers and doctors and scientists and rocket scientists. That you may say they're illiterate peasants, but they weren't. They're all fucking geniuses. So that's sort of how that goes. And you can see that if the top paid jobs, the best paid jobs in any country are 72%, or in effect 85% non-private sector, then you've got a problem. And I think that's to varying degrees across the entire Western world. You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.